Hi, I'm Valerie Day, a singer, educator, and creative explorer. You might know me from my work with the Grammy-nominated band New Shoes. Welcome to Living a Vocal Life, where I interview singers who have succeeded in creating a life in music. You'll hear from vocalists of all genres in different stages of their careers, including singers who've been on the Billboard charts and those who are teaching the next generation. What do they have in common? They're all performers with amazing stories to tell and experiences to share. In our conversations, you'll learn what inspired them to become a singer, the kinds of challenges they've encountered, and how they've overcome them. I'll also share what I've learned on my own journey as a singer and educator, practical tools and insights that will help you to live your best, most authentic vocal life. Hello and welcome to Living a Vocal Life, a podcast for singers. As I mentioned in the last episode, I'm taking a break from producing new podcast interviews. However, while on break, I thought I'd re-release a few highlighted interviews, some of the most insightful and enriching conversations I've had with singers over the last 5 years. This first re-release is actually 2 episodes in one, a series I originally released a year ago, all about motherhood and creativity. In the rhythm of life, singers share their insights on motherhood and creativity. You'll hear from 11 singers who generously agreed to answer 3 questions about how they navigate creativity and motherhood. How do you get your work done? What are your patterns or routines? And how do you treat yourself when you can't get to your work? A friend and former student, Rebecca Sanborn, posted these 3 questions on Facebook a few years ago when her daughter Nadia was 2.5 years old. The response she got was overwhelming, and when I read her post, it made me think back to my time as a young mother and the challenges of living a creative life while parenting. And then I had a thought. There are other mothers out there who are singers, and I'd love to know how they combine creativity and parenting. What a fascinating podcast episode their interviews would make. So I asked 11 singers if they would be game, and of course, they all said yes. When I asked them the 3 questions that Rebecca had posted, their responses were so rich and full of wisdom that I decided to create a 2-episode series, which I've combined into 1 episode for this re-release. In part 1, you'll hear how these singers structure their lives, including tips on finding time and solitude for their creative work. In part 2, you'll hear how they navigate their inner lives when they can't get to their work, plus the many practices they use to support their emotional well-being. The women I interviewed have all experienced motherhood from different perspectives, and of course, no 2 perspectives are the same. Yet despite their differences, there are some common threads. These women share a deep love for their children, and they all agree that parenting is one of the most difficult and rewarding things they've ever done. I invite you to take a listen, bookmark the episode, and then share it with singers you know who might find it helpful and maybe even inspiring as they navigate their own journey as a creative parent. Hello and welcome to this special episode of Living a Vocal Life, all about motherhood and creativity. This is a different kind of episode for me. Usually I focus on one voice, one singer, and their unique vocal journey. However, in this special 2-part series, you'll hear the voices of 11 singers who generously agreed to answer 3 questions about how they navigate creativity and motherhood. The questions came from a Facebook post that a friend and former student, Rebecca Sanborn, wrote a couple of years ago when her daughter Nadia was 2.5 years old. It was November in the Pacific Northwest, dark and dreary, almost a year into the pandemic. Rebecca had lost both her day job and her gigs, and on top of everything, it was the anniversary of her best friend's death. Her pandemic bubble consisted of herself, her daughter Nadia, and her husband Jai. Now, despite Jai being a very involved father, Rebecca had very little time alone. She found herself feeling envious of others who were posting on Facebook about how the pandemic was giving them more time, more time to learn, deepen their practice, or create. In a moment of desperation, she posted the following message. Artists with children, tell me your secrets. How do you get your work done? What are your patterns? How do you treat yourself when you can't get to your work? Her post struck a chord. 52 people commented, not all of whom were musicians. Some gave advice, while others commiserated. Many were men. The consensus was that parenting is never easy, and that having a child changes your relationship with yourself and your essential creative work, especially when that work is your reason for living. Andrew Solomon, author of Far from the Tree, writes that motherhood is an identity, and the passage to motherhood is one of the most significant shifts in identity that transpires in adulthood. In her book, The Baby on the Fire Escape, Creativity, Motherhood, and the Mind-Baby Problem, Julie Phillips summarizes Solomon's thesis. She explains that a woman who becomes a parent has to deal with two new relationships, one with her child and one with herself as a mother. Building these relationships, and for a creative mother, rebuilding her relationship to her vocation, involves redefining herself as a person in relation to her child and in relation to what she expects from motherhood. In effect, she comes of age all over again. Motherhood significantly impacts the work of women who are compelled to create. They must navigate this new coming of age while dealing with sleepless nights and disrupted creative routines and aspirations. For biological mothers, physical changes such as hormone fluctuations during and after pregnancy, weight gain and loss, and the risk of dehydration from nursing can affect their singing voice and psychological well-being. In Rebecca's Facebook post and the many responses to it, I heard an echo of my own struggle with balancing creativity and parenting. It made me wonder, how have other singers coped? And what is the new generation of mothers experiencing? Then I had another thought. Why not ask them? And that's how this podcast episode was born.
Woman's made to stand and sway. Rock the baby, the baby. A woman's made to stand and sway. Rock the baby, the baby. A woman's made to stand and sway. A woman's made to stand and sway. Bring the water, the water. A woman's made to stand and sway. A woman's made to stand and sway. Bring the water, the water. A woman's made to stand and sway. Rock the baby, the baby.
The struggle to balance art, work, and family isn't new. Throughout history, women have had limited options regarding their roles in civic and family life. They've often been relegated to caretaking positions, responsible for raising children, caring for the sick and elderly, and confined to the home. In or outside of the family unit, most had little power or agency. For instance, it wasn't until 1900 that every state in the U.S. granted married women the right to keep the money they made and own property in their own name. And their children? Well, until the early 1800s, children were considered property, owned by their fathers. If you were poor or a person of color, your options were even more limited. Not only were you responsible for your own children, but you often had to take on domestic work and care for the children of others. Since those times, we've made some progress. It's been slow, but gains have been made in the last 2 centuries. Women have more choices regarding if and when they become a mother, at least for now. Men, as the response to Rebecca's post shows, are more involved in raising children than ever before. But the tension between mothering and vocation still exists. I know from personal experience that part of that tension stems from an intense desire to create, the other from the incredible love you feel for the small being you're caring for. A friend once said to me that having a child is like undergoing open heart surgery, but the surgeon forgets to close you back up afterward. Your heart is just out there, vulnerable to everything. So how do we as singers cope? How do we find the time to nurture both our children and our creativity? In Rebecca's 3 questions, I saw 2 main threads. First, there's the external thread, the practical, the structure in a life. Who will take care of the children and when? How do you make time in your days for islands of solitude in which to practice or create? Then there's the internal thread. What kind of relationship do you have with yourself, your children, and your art? How do all these different parts of a self, often with different agendas and competing commitments, make space for each other in the constellation of your being? The responses to these questions were so rich and full of wisdom. When I began editing the interviews, I realized it would be impossible for one episode to hold it all. So I decided to make it a 2-part series. In part 1, you'll hear answers to that first thread of questions about how these singers structure their lives as creative parents. In part 2, you'll hear how women navigate their inner lives when they can't get to their work, plus the many practices they use to support their emotional well-being. The women I interviewed have all experienced motherhood from different perspectives. Some have partners, while others were single when their children were born. Some of their pregnancies were planned, others were a surprise. A few women work as full-time singers, while others supplement their income with day jobs. 2 are full-time mothers who sing or perform when they can. Of course, no 2 of their perspectives are the same. Yet, despite their differences, there are some common threads. These women share a deep love for their children, and they all agree parenting is one of the most difficult and rewarding things they've ever done. So let's take a look at some of the answers to Rebecca's first question. How do singers get their creative work done? Here's my friend, Karla Harris, a jazz singer, songwriter, and vocal instructor at Kennesaw State University. Besides performing and recording, Karla is a freelance writer for corporate communications, a job that she's done for decades. She lives in Roswell, Georgia, with her husband, John, and has 2 grown sons, JJ, 34, and Nate, 29. So when your boys were young, they're only 5 years apart, how did you get your work done?
When my youngest was little, my oldest was in kindergarten. So that helped because I could get a babysitter for Nate while JJ was at school. When JJ was little, my mother-in-law helped watch him. We lived near her and she helped watch him. So yeah, just because I worked from the home didn't mean that I had all these accessible hours by any means, because as everybody who has little kids knows, as soon as you sit down to work is when they decide they need your complete and total attention. I can remember times when I'd be on the phone and I threw like a box of vanilla wafers basically in their general direction. Take the sugar. And please let me make a phone call.
I know. There's so little uninterrupted time.
I don't feel like it was a truly very creative period for me musically. When the kids were really little, I was in mom mode and I was performing with bands, but, I had to get prepared for that. So I can remember spending time in the basement, while they were busy doing things maybe with their dad. So I'd be learning new songs and transcribing lyrics because there was no internet and there was no way to go find the lyrics. You had to listen to the song and try to figure out what they were saying and write your lyrics down. As far as writing music or anything, that didn't come till much, much later. And I do feel like your brain has to be open to receiving that, and it has to have some uncluttered, some big, broad times of uncluttered thinking, at least for me.
It seems like it takes uninterrupted time where you can actually go deep enough to get into flow, and then other ideas come than would if, see, you only have 15 minutes. Or there's the threat of the wake up, like they're napping, but any minute, half your brain and umbilical cord is like over in the other room, like making sure they're alive all the time.
Yeah, exactly. Or the fatigue, or the very basic things about just living that need to get done during that time.
Right.
I need to, mop the floor or whatever it is.
Laundry,
yeah. Make the grocery shopping list, all those things.
And here's Arlie James, a vocalist, poet, and somatic voice coach who's currently in graduate school and has 2 children, Willa, who's 13, and Iris, who's 8. Ara lives on Vashon Island in Washington State with her partner, guitarist Jamie Stillway. How did you get your work done when they were younger?
I hate to say it because I know a lot of us talk about it and it's just the answer I don't want to give, but it was waking up before they woke up. It was creating, a lot of, in the sort of therapy world, there's a lot of talk about islands of safety, right? Like we need to create islands of safety for our mental health. And I think as an artist, creating islands of solitude, islands of time that belong to you. And again, this idea that you're going to have all day, or, have a 4-hour chunk, or have an entire day or a retreat, this idea, this isn't always accessible. And certainly we can have a whole conversation about privilege, right? And the reality of all of us have different responsibilities and different lives and resources. So for me, waking up before they were awake oftentimes really was the only time that I would have time in my mind before they were up. And it may have been because as a parent, once they were up, especially when they're little, you're on for, like, if you're not on, they might not live. I mean, it's that kind of on, right? Like you're on 100% of the time. And so when they're sleeping, for me, when they were asleep, I could have the breath out and have time to sit and write and get my brain around thoughts that just weren't accessible when they were awake.
Yeah.
Right.
If you wake up early enough to have that alone time, sometimes you sacrifice sleep. So
that's right.
Is that something that used to happen?
Oh, of course. Absolutely. And it wasn't, and this idea that like every morning I'm going to wake up at 5 and that's when I'm going to get my work done. It's not like that, right? I mean, there are some mornings that you can wake up and some mornings you just can't.
Sleep is a wonderful thing, 'cause when you sleep, the land of dreams await you.
So there's mornings, and then there's the other end of the day. Moana Wolfgramm, one of the lead singers of the platinum-selling 80s band The Jets, has 6 children with her husband Junior, 3 boys and 3 girls, ranging in age from 10 to 22. Although Moana and Junior still travel for Jets gigs, they usually do so on the weekends. When they're at home on Oahu, Junior works a day job at the local college, and Moana holds down the fort at home. They also work together, writing songs and recording when they have the time, usually at night. Here's Moana talking about the challenge of finding the time for creativity.
Oh my goodness, that has been the biggest challenge. My husband and I are songwriters, and trying to write music with little kids around. And mind you, I breastfed all of them. So we had to get creative. Bedtime, put them down, and then we'd sneak away from 10 to 11 at night till 2 in the morning, just trying to write and create. I mean, before we had kids, we had all the time in the world to just pull from any kind of influence we had and just sit for hours and just create. But when the kids come along, it's just way more challenging. I give it to anybody who's a songwriter or an artist in any way, because they just drain a lot. You're trying to be there for your kids, and you're also trying to remember you're your own person. So we started off doing the nocturnal shift just for a few hours that we could put in there. And, my husband's doing a day job and I'm full-time mother. So, it was hard to get creative, but that's kind of what we did in the beginning. And now that they're older, they take care of themselves. They kind of know a schedule. And then he and I can kind of run away and do some projects. Then I come back and run them to soccer and basketball. And then, so I don't know. It's just one of those things where you just roll with the, whatever's happening at the time.
Right. Because anything can happen at any moment and often does. Yeah.
Yes. Right before this interview, my special needs daughter flooded the toilet. So I was just in there with rubber boots on, just finishing that. Then I was like, hey, let me get myself together for the interview.
I know.
Just nothing ever goes right,
No. And actually, do you find that it kind of makes you a little looser about like how you show up to these things?
Yes. I think you have to accept reality and laugh about it. Yeah.
So when you say that you and Junior, your husband, get away, does that just mean you go to a room in your house? What do you do to create the space?
Our last project was a gospel project with 4 sisters, and we worked on 2 records for them. It was kind of like a contemporary inspirational album and then traditional hymns. We worked at night to create the arrangements, and then we worked with some arrangers to help us execute it in the studio. So him and I would spend our evenings pretty much arranging the stuff. And then while the kids were in school, we would run away and create studio time. Time management is key. And if my husband was working, I would go in the studio, work with the girls, work on all the vocals. And then him and I would come back and edit at night and work with editors, tuning them and all that fun stuff. So yeah, I mean, luckily it was a local project. We could just come right down the street. I had to work out studio time at like 6 different studios in our area just to make it work. And then him and I would arrange in one living room while the kids are doing homework in the back living room. And we don't have a big space, but you literally just do what you can just within your environment. I mean, that is the challenge of being a parent and still doing what you love. Yeah, I think the challenge is just you have to have a sense of humor. You have to roll with the punches. And then if you're a perfectionist, that has to be thrown out the window or you'll make yourself crazy. You'll beat yourself up. And I mean, you're not talking about a job where you just have a skill set. This is creative work. Creativity doesn't just, show up. You're still trying to dig deep into something that no one else has created yet.
Yep. A sense of humor is definitely essential. And speaking for myself as a recovering perfectionist, I can also relate to what Moana says about throwing perfectionism out the window to stay sane. You just don't have time. As a wise woman once told me, you've just got to throw down and let good enough be good enough. Danielle Tucker is one of the lead singers of the San Diego-based band The Mighty Untouchables. Danielle has a thriving vocal studio and is the driving force behind the Unstoppable Singer Summit, a 3-day virtual event she created for singers, featuring over 30 top industry experts that she hosts once a year. Here's Danielle talking about what life is like now that her 8 and 10-year-old daughters, Ashley and Anna, are in school, plus the mindset she's developed over time to create a family schedule that works best for all of them. How do you get your work done with these 2 little ones?
Oh, gosh. Well, up until now, at this stage of their life, it was tricky. It was really tricky. But they're both in school, so I really try to make the most of the time while they are at school to get all of my stuff done. I had enrolled them in the after-school program so that I could lengthen my office hours, because I want to be able to shut everything down by the time they get home. So my attention is on them and what they need and their activities. That's not always possible, but that's what I'm always shooting for. For me, it's a juggling act of just constantly reprioritizing things. So everything's always urgent. Everything is always needs to be done right away. But I think I've just developed more of a mindset of like, I'm just going to keep the most important thing in my mind at any given time, even though there's 20 important things on the list. I'm going to keep the top one in mind and try to, work on that first. Ever since my kids were young, I've always wanted to really show my kids who I really am. And so they were raised in a green room. I went back to work after having them probably like 4 weeks after having the babies. They were in the green room with nanny. I was coming backstage and nursing them and, all this craziness. And I've never been, I guess, what you'd consider maybe a traditional mom where you do certain things a certain way or you're a good homemaker. I'm not bad at those things, but I kind of do things differently because of who I am as a business person and artistically, but I want my girls to see that. I want them to see that you create your life the way you want to do it, and you don't need to apologize for that, or you don't need to fit a certain mold. Society tells you how you're supposed to be a mom, or else your kids are going to be messed up.
And it'll be all your fault.
All your fault.
Yeah.
And, so if you don't have a refrigerator full of organic greens, you're done. Your kids are going to prison. It's just not true, so I do things off the beaten path a lot, but I have 2 really happy little girls, and they're really thriving. They're doing great. They know who their mom is, and they know that when they grow up, they can be whoever they want to be. And so we have built a life and a schedule and a routine around who we are as people. It's not the right thing for everybody, but it really, really works for us. And so, I think any mom out there that's struggling with that, I think it's really first removing that weight of guilt or comparison to other parents out there that I don't look like the mom next door and I don't act the way she does. I would just drop that right away and just, ask yourself, who are you as a family? And, how can you build a schedule and routine and habits that align with that? And don't apologize for that.
So when they were younger, before they were in school, what looked different? And how much does your husband help?
Yeah, it was so much different back then. And I felt that same pressure of just so much mom guilt around the fact that I really wanted to keep the momentum going in my business, but I also wanted to be a really good mom. Inevitably, when you're putting effort in one thing, another is suffering. And so I guess it's just kind of a little bit of a back and forth of trying to keep that somewhat in balance. But if I could go back and talk to myself as a new mom, I would say, relax. And it's not always going to be like this. Just try to enjoy all of the different stages and not feel too much pressure to make things happen. All the potty training, the bottle feeding, all of the things, the walking, all those things you feel so pressured about. I felt tremendous guilt about the fact that I had to have a lot of help. I had to have a nanny all the time. My mom was present and was there to help. My husband was there to help. I always felt guilty that I should be able to do all this by myself. But if I had tried to do that and also run multiple businesses, I would have had a nervous breakdown. So, I asked for help. I did the best that I could. And it was a tremendous relief when they did turn that corner where you develop a certain level of trust of your kids where they're not going to jump out of a window or burn the house down or anything crazy.
Right.
And, you can turn your back for a minute. And
right. They're more than potty trained. You can take them out in the world and they won't freak out and lie screaming on the grocery store floor because they didn't get the gum or,
right.
They're like,
yes,
all those things. Yeah.
Yeah.
So.
Thank God they're at the age they are now, because I really try to teach them to be independent and to take care of their own needs that they are capable of taking care of. And I think as moms, we really kind of chop their legs out from underneath them a lot of times by trying to do too much for them, where we're really, in the end, we're really trying to grow capable people that we can send out into society, that can be helpful. So I really always working on that, trying to make them more independent and build their confidence by showing them that they can do a lot more for themselves than they think they can.
Nikenji, a multi-genre singer and actress based in New Jersey, also has something to say about building confidence in her daughter, 8-year-old Jazara. Your daughter, Jazara, was born in 2014. Mm-hmm. And from what I've seen on Instagram, she sounds a lot like you. She's super energetic, tiny, cute. She's totally a ham in front of the camera. She loves to perform. So I have a few questions to ask you about parenting in childhood, but I'm going to start with this one. How do you get your work done now that you're a mother? What's changed from before parenthood to now?
I have to allocate time specifically to do my work when I am not with her. I mean, listen, I can't choose all the time. There's definitely times where I'm working and I'm home with her, right? So sometimes you just can't avoid that. But now I try and do all of my work and interviews like this when she is in school. And so I have time from after I drop her off at school to when it's time to pick her up at 3:00 to do all the different things that I need to do. Then I will also be up late at night. So after she goes to sleep, I'll do some work. Even though my husband will be like, come to bed, honey. You know, I just got just a couple of more things I need to do, a few more documents I need to print out, you know, things like that. So it's just kind of finding the pockets of time. And then other times you just got to turn it off and be totally focused and present, because these moments don't last forever. And I want to be as present as possible in her life so that she's not 18 years old and I'm like, what happened, right? And there are times, it's not always perfect. There are times where she's, Mommy, why do you always have to be on the telephone? And I have to explain to her, well, Mommy works on the telephone. I'm not searching the web, you know. I'm answering emails on the phone. The phone has turned into like my workstation. No one's walking around with their computers anymore, right?
No.
So you're getting all your emails. I'm responding to emails. I'm sending documents, sending attachments. It's like all on my telephone, right? So she's seeing that. And so I have to explain to her, and I'm very transparent with her. I'm like, Mommy has to work right now. This is work. Like, Mommy has to go on the email. She has to send things. And in order for you to have all the wonderful lessons that you're doing on a weekly basis, that robotics club that you like so much after school, the piano lessons, the dance classes, all of that stuff has to be paid for by Mommy and Daddy. So this is my version of work, and when I go and perform. So I have to I always have to set it straight for her so she knows that Mommy is working hard, because I'm trying to make sure that not only am I pursuing my dream and my passion, but I'm trying to create a legacy to pass on to her. And I'm trying to give her the opportunities, all the opportunities I can possibly give her that she could have to pursue whatever she wants to pursue, right? And have that training and that exposure. So I'm very vocal about that with her. And so I feel like because of that transparency, being vocal about that, she understands it more when she sees me working. So I try to incorporate her fully into my life, you know, not just Mommy has to go to work, but like, you want to come with Mommy to go to work, right? When I have those opportunities, she'll travel with me when I do my symphony concerts. Sometimes I've taken her out of school for a day or two so that she can be with me on the road doing a symphonic concert. And then I've also incorporated her in shows. Fort Worth Symphony, we did a holiday concert, and I asked the conductor if it was okay for her to do a duet with me. And she did, and she was so professional. And I can't even imagine, I've never had that kind of experience at 8 years old, right? And you have this 8-year-old who walks on stage, and when I'm introducing her in the middle of the song, this huge sound of applause from a 3,000 seat house, and she just walks on stage just totally cool, and just with the full orchestra in the back. And then I didn't even know, the conductor and I watch each other for a cutoff, right? And I do a hand movement, and I didn't know that she was doing a hand movement with me.
Oh, how cool!
I saw a video of it. Because she's behind me, me and the conductor are eye to eye, and she's on the other side of me.
Right.
So he's watching me, and I'm like, yeah, boom. And I do the hand, and I saw a video of it, and she did it exactly with me. It's like, wow. So she's holding her own, and whether she's going to do this for a career, who knows? But at least she has that confidence level of being able to hold a room.
Yes.
Whether she's singing on stage or whether she is introducing a cure for cancer.
Right.
So
right.
She's going to have that fire, and it makes me so proud. So parenting is hard, but hard in a good way, because you just want to put all your heart into it. You want to be the best. I want to be the best mom, and I want to be the best mentor, and I want to give her everything I could possibly do, but at the same time, not spoil her, and at the same time, make her an independent individual so that I don't have to worry when it's time for her to leave the nest, and be solid as to like what her passion is, and be able to speak up when, you know, she wants something, and to not take no for an answer if it's something she solely believes in and is the right thing to do. And with everything that has happened with the Black Lives Matter and so much that's happening socially too, and, you know, she's involved in that too. Like, I've had her with me for some of these peaceful marches here in New Jersey. And so she is like in it to win it, like totally, like, I mean, kids, not just her, but just this new generation that has been exposed to so many different things. It's been wonderful to see how they're going to turn out as adults, you know, with these movements and making a difference in this new world that we live in. So my goal is to raise her as a leader and to raise her as a strong, fierce, smart, talented woman.
Speaking of strong, smart, and talented, this next mother, Rosi Amador, is all that and more. A multilingual singer and percussionist, she also ran Music Amador, an international booking agency. Now, in addition to singing in a band with her husband Brian, Rosi runs the family voiceover business, Amador Bilingual Voiceovers. Rosi has 2 grown children, Alisa and Zia. After 5 years of submitting recordings, Alisa won NPR's Tiny Desk concert last year. Rosi's transgender son Zia is a visual artist and voiceover actor. One of his many projects is at the Museum of Modern Art in New York City. It's Zia's voice you'll hear if you go see the exhibit about Guillermo del Toro's fantastic film Pinocchio. Here's Rosi talking about the early years of touring with 2 twin babies. Can you imagine? No. How did you manage to get your work done when they were younger?
Oh, what a great question. So I did end up having only 2 children. Brian and I thought, oh, it'd be nice to have 2 girls. We thought they'd, you know, pop out one at a time, but that's okay. We thought, okay, fine then. We'll take them, you know. I was already 37 because I had waited because of the touring. You know, I thought it's just too hard. We better get the touring, you know, done as much as possible. Plus, we had toured with our bass player whose daughter, as an infant, really needed a lot of her attention. So I thought, this is too hard, you know, for us. It will be too hard for us. So I waited, and we decided to continue, but we decided to ramp down a little bit. So from 150 shows, I think we went down to, I don't know, like 80. And at that time, what we would do is when they were really little, well, first I took 3 months off. So then after that, when they were really little, I hired someone to help us and come to shows. And we kept it very local in the beginning to just hold on to them for me, you know, so that I wouldn't have to be nursing them, you know, because I nursed for a long time. And that was a priority for me. So I wanted them nearby. I didn't want to leave them somewhere with somebody. And then I actually put it in our contracts when we toured. The presenters had to supply someone to take care of my kids. And most of the time, they agreed to it, you know. I paid for it, but I needed their help in arranging it. And that way I'd only be away for a few hours.
And my question would be, as someone listening, oh, how could you trust these people? Did you feel like, I don't know, maybe in the beginning it was harder, fear? And then...
You know, I didn't. And I think because so many of our wonderful friends would help take care of our twins. And they didn't know them, and they did great. These twins they got along with everybody. And they weren't problematic. They weren't needy. So they were super social, you know. So I felt a sense of trust. And I also thought, okay, these people are paying us money to come and perform. They're not going to give me a mass murderer to take care of my kids. They're, you know, they know that I'm a mom, Brian's a dad, and they're not going to feel very good if something happens to our kids. So they made sure to choose trusted people. And it always went well. We would come home and the kids would be like the next day, like, we had such a good time with so-and-so. Like, good.
I bet. And I wonder, too, that must have impacted them in kind of a powerful way to learn that they could trust other people.
Absolutely. Well, and they toured with us. You know, they were in the back seat of our van with our musicians, learning from them. And oh my gosh, so many stories that have come out of that experience. They just got used to having all these uncles because it was a lot of men and me in the sextet. Yeah. And they were raised in green rooms. They say it themselves, you know, raised in green rooms because they constantly toured with us. And when they were 6, we made a bilingual children's CD at the request of our fans
Oh,
who
how
started
cool.
having kids and saying, don't you think you would like to make a CD for kids sometime with your music? And we made a bilingual one, and we consulted with bilingual educators and the head of our kids' preschool and consultants. And Rounder Records put it out. And we had an angel who was someone who really cared about our family fund it and made
how
it
lovely.
possible. And our kids sang on it.
What advice would you give to aspiring singers who are also mothers?
Get ready. It's quite a ride. You have to be so focused, so committed. I think that I've always been very good at asking for help. And that has served me well. I know what I'm good at, and I know what I'm less good at. Once I was making enough money to cover my basic expenses, this is even before the kids, I was like, okay, I have enough. I'm going to bring in someone else to take care of this chunk of work so that I can do the stuff that drives our business forward. So, if you're a musician, you have to be an entrepreneur. You have to get organized. You have to do your own finances. You have to do your own marketing. And at some point you need to figure out, okay, do I have enough money to farm out some of this work that I'm doing so that I don't go crazy?
Yeah.
And I recommend that you think about that carefully and start doing it as soon as you're able, because otherwise you burn out.
Yeah, it's too much.
And it affects your music. It affects everything, your spirit. It affects your enjoyment of life. I still see it. Some of Alisa's friends are working so hard.
Yeah.
And I see the effects of the burnout, or the effects that it has on their body. They ache. And my heart goes out to them because I was there.
Yeah.
And, I didn't immediately have the money to get help. But as soon as I did, I started to do it, and it made a big difference. And it did mean that I made less money, but I had a saner life.
Another mother that's taken her child on the road is China Forbes, lead singer and songwriter of Pink Martini. China, like Rosi, waited until she was in her late 30s to have a baby. Her son Cameron is now in high school. Here's China talking about pregnancy, postpartum depression, touring with an infant, and how she gets her creative work done when she's home. Did motherhood come easy to you? Was it different than you imagined it would be?
It was not easy. I think I was delusional because I felt like I spent my 30s, because I had him right before I turned 39. So like most of my 30s, I was fretting about, am I going to have a baby? Am I not going to have a baby? Do I want to have a baby? Maybe not. Like my sister had babies and I thought, oh my God, I don't know if I can handle this. But then I finally realized as I was getting up there that I really did want to. And then pregnancy was heaven for me. Heaven, because I've always been asked if I'm pregnant because my stomach sticks out a lot and my limbs are more thin. So people always think that I'm pregnant, to the point where they don't even wonder. They just blurt out like, when are you due? It's like, oh my God.
Never ask someone that question. Never.
Never. I won't ask even people who are about to go into labor. if they're
Right.
pregnant. But I was so happy when I was pregnant because I could say, yes,
Yay.
I am pregnant. It was I didn't have to hold in my stomach. It was so heavenly. I didn't really have any horrible complications. It was so great. And then I had the baby and he was outside of my body, and suddenly everything was so complicated. It was like easy to bring him around with me when I was pregnant. Suddenly I needed to have a nanny and go on tour with a baby. And I had postpartum depression and it was really horrible. And I didn't really feel connected when he was a tiny baby. It was just really horrible. And I don't know. I just feel like people don't realize that it's not so great for everyone. I mean, I think now people are much more aware of that, but it really takes you by surprise because you're so happy when the baby's born and you can't believe, like, you're so lucky that you had this baby and this is so great. And then suddenly everything changes and like crashes into this horrible pit of despair.
I think it's really hard because up until just this very moment in our culture, you didn't talk about it that much, except maybe with good friends who were also mothers, to say, wow, maybe we were delusional, in thinking we could do this, because it is much harder. I don't know about you, but I felt really guilty about some of the feelings that I was having.
Yes. Oh, yeah. it's really tough, especially if you're like having chemical imbalances, and you don't, it's just, you actually cannot connect because of the way you're feeling. But I finally came out of that, and I've had a great time with my son. He's so funny and cute and hilarious. And I wrote down everything he ever said that was funny. And just made a book for his 13th birthday called Cam Said. And it's all of the things he ever said and all the pictures of him at those ages. And
What
it's
a great
so
gift.
cool.
Oh,
It's
what a
so
great
cool.
gift.
And he read it out loud to both of his grandmothers
Oh.
and loved it.
I bet they were in heaven. What a great idea.
It was really good. Except they weren't in heaven because some of it's wildly inappropriate. But they liked it up to a point.
So, yeah. So how long did it take you to come out of that postpartum depression?
It was about 6 to 8 months.
Did your hormones just change, or did you do anything
No,
specific?
I had to take medication.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I couldn't, it wasn't happening on its own.
Yeah. And I think a lot of times women don't ask for the help they need, but you were probably desperate. How soon after he was born did you go on tour?
I went on tour in May. He was born at the end of February.
Wow.
So he was 3 months.
3 months old.
Yeah.
And you took a nanny with you on the tour,
Yeah.
you said. And then were you breastfeeding and backstage and then running on stage? And
Oh my God. Yes. I was breastfeeding up until 15 months. So he toured until he was 15 months, and I would breastfeed him, go on stage, and then come off. And I don't know how graphic I want to get on the on the airways, but let's just say it was an emergency. Like
Right.
things build up, and you need
Yes.
to release them, or else
Yes.
there's a mad. It's kind of like a fire hydrant. Let's just say that.
Wow. Yeah, it's stressful. I mean, touring is stressful, and then to have this little one that is dependent on you, along with the whole audience being dependent on you and the band dependent on you for showing up and singing, it's a lot of stress.
It is.
How do you get your work done?
Now at this age?
Yeah, now. I mean, I'm sure that it's changed over the years.
Well, I'm a night person, and yet my studio is at my piano, which is, in the main room of my house and above Cameron's bedroom. So when it's nighttime, I can't really do stuff. I can't really play the piano or record anything. So I try to get it done. Like, I've been forced to get it done during school hours. It's just not it's not the creative time of my dreams, but I found that having a child imposed a schedule on me that was actually a bit helpful, because it wasn't just never ending, undefined time. It was like, you have only this many hours, get it done. And so it's motivating in that way. But the hard thing is when they're napping, but you want to take a nap too.
Right.
And that's probably what you should do. But you kind of have to just accept. It's all about acceptance. Like, you're not going to get your work done. And just deal with it. Like, you cannot do it all. You can't do everything perfectly all the time. So maybe give yourself some time, or hire a caregiver to give yourself like a day or here and there where you have more time.
Right, where you can really dive in, because sometimes, I mean, I agree with you. When you have a set time period and you know that, like, okay, I've got an hour and this is what I have to just throw down. There's no dinking about.
No.
And then you just have to get right to work. But then I know that I used to really miss those longer, expansive times where I could really drill down into something in a way where I knew I wouldn't have to come back out of it for a while, 2 or 3 hours.
Right. Oh my God, that's heaven. I
Yeah.
love that. I because it's so hard. For me, it's hard to muster the energy to start. But once I'm started, I never want to stop. And it's always annoying that like these other things stop you, and you can never like really have that immersion that you're craving. So I think it's knowing that they're going to grow up, and this is a short window of time. It feels like it never ends and it will never change. But that was the thing motherhood made me realize is everything is a phase. And as hard as some of the phases feel, they really aren't going to last that long.
No.
So just maybe try to enjoy the things that are happening in that phase, like how darn cute that little 3-year-old is.
So what about women who don't have resources, who are just starting out in life and have barely begun to realize their dream of becoming a singer? What happens if you find yourself pregnant at age 16 and decide to keep the baby while still pursuing your goals? Sounds hard, right? Whitney Jones is a dynamic, talented singer-songwriter who refused to give up her dreams or her baby when she became pregnant while still in high school. With the help of family, she graduated with honors, worked 2 jobs, and raised money by selling chicken dinners to move to Boston, where she'd been accepted to the Berklee School of Music. Whitney drove from Atlanta, Georgia to Massachusetts with Robert, her 3-year-old son. The money she'd saved was enough to get them there with a little left over for living expenses, but Whitney still needed more to pay her tuition. Undaunted and determined, Whitney planted herself and her son in the school's financial aid office and stayed there until they found a way to help her. Here's Whitney talking about her decision to become a mother and her determination to continue pursuing her dream of becoming a singer. So you were 16 then when you became pregnant.
Yes.
And I read that all you'd wanted since 7th grade was to go to Berklee College of Music in Boston.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm just wondering, why did you decide, okay, well, I'm going to become a mom now instead of later?
Well, honestly, it's a result of trauma. You know, I really believe that if a teenager ends up pregnant, then something's happened along the way. And that's essentially what happened. Just to be transparent, I was molested as a child and I was grieving, going through a lot of grief process after my cousin, who was like my brother, died. We relocated from Illinois to Georgia. It was just a huge shift. Everything was different on top of grief. And I was just kind of lashing out, so to speak. And boom, I ended up pregnant. And I remember not knowing what my future would look like at that point. It wasn't like I planned it, you know? I couldn't see past my circumstance.
Mm-hmm.
And I honestly wanted to die. I had thoughts of suicide. I feel like I was just in survival mode. And I remember crying a lot, and my stepmom was in town, and I said, oh, I made my family a statistic. I don't want to be a statistic. Oh, you know, like, woe is me. This happened, and I don't want to be a statistic. And she looked at me and she said, well, don't. It was like a light bulb went off, and it was like, what? You can still do everything that you said you wanted to do. You just have a baby. It's going to be hard, but you can do it. Oh, okay. So that was a turning point for me, because I definitely was depressed. I'll say that. I was going through depression, and that light bulb went off, and it basically lit a fire under me. It lit a fire under me. I was like, okay, here we go. I'm going to do everything that I set out to do. You know, I'm going to beat the odds. I had so many people doubting me at that point. I wanted to prove all them wrong. I wanted to show them that I can do what I said I was going to do, which is make it.
And make it she did. Whitney graduated from Berklee with a bachelor's degree in music with a concentration in music therapy. To graduate, she created a regimented schedule that enabled her to parent, attend classes, study, and hold a part-time job. She credits that schedule with teaching her how to be disciplined, a skill that still serves her. Fast forward to now. Whitney lives with her husband and their blended family in Phoenix, Arizona. You've had 2 more children.
Yes.
Since you had Robert years ago.
My husband and I, we have a blended family.
Okay.
So we have Robert, who's the 19-year-old, and then we have 2 others, and they're 14, 12, and then our toddler, our 2-year-old, and then the 6-week-old. That's the age range, 19 to 6 weeks.
So how do you get your creative work done now?
Honestly, it's the same as before. I have to wait until I'm inspired. And when I'm inspired, everybody in the house knows I hear nothing. The food will burn. I don't know what's going on. Our other children, they call me Mama Wit. They're like, Mama Wit, Mama Wit. And I'm just like, huh? Oh, okay. Yeah.
You just tune it all out and focus.
I tune everybody out. I tune them out. The only person I can't tune out right now is the 6-week-old, obviously,
right.
you know?
Right.
I'm also nursing. I think breastfeeding is amazing for the mother and for the baby. So I don't tune him out or the toddler. But, you know, for the most part, everyone else is like, I cannot hear what you're saying. I don't know what's going on. I am writing. I do a lot of writing when people are asleep. So
do you sacrifice your own sleep sometimes for the muse?
Oh yeah. But it doesn't feel like it. I can go without food and water when I'm working on music and sleep. It energizes me. Yeah.
Do you feel though like it's harder to go deep into the creative process when there's all this other stuff going on?
Now, I would say that there are challenges where, you know, there may be a time limit or I have to tend to something as a mom or a wife or just within our household. So I have to stop, which always makes me a little sad. But, you know, ideally, it'd be nice to just sit for 12 hours and just work on music uninterrupted. That hasn't been the case for me. So it's kind of like, okay, the babies sleep. All right. The toddlers sleep. All right. Everybody else is at school. Husband's at work. Oh, okay. Woohoo. Gonna work on this. You know what I mean? I'm like writing really quickly or doing something. Sometimes it's in the car. I have a lot of voice memos because I listen to my music on repeat and I'm like hearing, okay, what else am I hearing with this part? What am I doing? Oh, and so I'm driving, picking kids up and I'm like recording voice memos. You guys be quiet. I got to record this idea, you know, and they know. They know.
They're respectful of your time and your creativity. Because have you talked to them about that?
So Robert obviously grew up with me in music, right? And the other two, I've known them for 4 years now. So they've seen, you know, what I do and they've come to performances and concerts. They see me at the piano writing or recording videos or this or that, you know? So they know. One of my sons, he said, Mama Wit, when you going to make some new music? I'm tired of hearing this song. So I was like, okay, fine, I'll make something. And so I've been working on my album actually for the past couple of years. So now I'm like, see, I have new music.
There are numerous ways that mothers find to create space for themselves, stealing moments when the children are sleeping, in school, or even like Whitney, tuning everyone out when she's inspired. These women also rely on family, partners, and childcare to create pockets of time for their work, islands of solitude to practice and create. Here's Karla Harris talking about one of the ways she made time every week for songwriting.
I do remember there was a time, it was the first time that I got into songwriting, and I was able to carve out, with the help of my husband, a certain number of evenings that I went to a guitar playing friend of mine and we were collaborating on writing. And this is when the kids were little. And so that's what I did. We wrote a handful of songs and we entered them into some local St. Louis contests. And it was really a great creative outlet and it was fun. And I did that for a relatively short period of time. And then, you know, life took over and things got busy and I put it away and I didn't go back to it for 20 years, I guess, you know, to songwriting. But there was that time that I made those appointments. I reached out to him and asked if he'd be interested, and we had appointments. It was very intentional. And I think that's another thing, too. If it's important to you, then you will figure out a way to get that time in.
And here's Ara talking about the importance of creating islands of solitude within a creative relationship.
Rainer Maria Rilke has this quote that talks about when you love someone being guardians of each other's solitude.
Ooh.
And I think particularly, I mean, for any relationship, but being in a relationship with another artist. And I know you know this, you and John, it's like, you have to have time alone. You have to have time away. You can't be interrupted and there's beautiful work that happens when you co-create with someone, and it's very different than the work that has to happen in solitude. There's no replacement for it because it's a relationship with you and you. It's a relationship with your voice and your creativity and your mind and your heart. And it's a singular journey. It really is.
Alex Weiler and her husband, Brendan, are both creative. She's a singer-songwriter. He's a visual artist. Like most creatives, they do better when there's time and space to go deeply into their creative processes. With 2 children, 5 and 18 months old, finding that time can be challenging, but they've found a way. Here's how they create islands of solitude for each other.
We are always trying to look out for each other. I think being each other's advocate for our artwork, for the other person's artwork, because we know how healthy and how good it is for both ourselves and the other person to have that time to release some things, to fill up the well, like you said. And so we have found with just how we work, we both do better with like large chunks of time. And so mostly on the weekends, we call it splitting the day or splitting the weekend, where we'll decide in the beginning of the weekend, okay, do we want to split one day where, I take the morning and you take the afternoon? Or do we need a whole day? Maybe it's been one of those weeks or months where we need, I'm going to take Saturday and you take Sunday. And then there's no resentment. There's no like, oh, well, he's taking more time than I am. Or, we really try to be careful about respecting each other's creative time. And a lot of times I'm working on music, I need them out of the house. And so there's like a lot of coordinating that he and I do pretty much at the beginning of every weekend, just anticipating that we will need time to recharge, time to ourselves. We're both a little more introverted than others, and so we need that alone time. And our kids, they roll with it, and there's definitely like, oh man, you guys need alone time, from the 5-year-old. He's like, what do you mean alone time? But he knows it's what we need, and we try to be really vocal about, it's not time away from you that we need, it's just time to just take care of us.
I love that.
So, yeah, I think as they get older, maybe they will also need alone time. We'll see.
Becoming parents was a huge shift in the creative lives of singer-songwriter Stephanie Schneiderman and her husband Tony Furtado, one of the country's top banjo players and a gifted sculptor. Before their son Liam was born, they toured extensively together and separately. Tony and Stephanie are songwriters. Before they had a child, they had plenty of space to create. Here's Stephanie talks about how things changed after becoming parents. Having a child in the mix, how did that change your musical career?
So in such an enormous way. I think one thing that has worked well with Tony and I is that we both understand what the role of solitude plays in our personal creativity. Mm-hmm. And so it was a relationship where there was quite a bit of space, even though how connected we are and how devoted we are to each other, there's a lot of space. And I think that made it work. And that ties into your question, because that really changed with Liam, because your time and your space, it changes.
I know for me, even though we waited 20 years to have Malcolm, which is a weird thing to be able to say, but we thought we were ready. And then, oh my God, I wasn't. I had no idea. And then I felt like there was this invisible umbilical cord always there. As he grew older and I was able to do more things, I've never felt like I was doing anything well. I felt guilty about not being there for him because I was focused on other things and I wanted to still create. And then, I felt like I wasn't doing any of the other things well either. So I don't know what it's like for you, but
pretty much what you just said.
How do you deal? How do you cope with that feeling of never quite getting any of the lists ticked off?
It's just such a tangled thing. And there's so much in there because, it's these small moments you want to be available for. You want to be available for them.
Mm-hmm. And you can't just show up and say, okay, now we're going to have quality time. Let's have a special moment. It doesn't
special moment
like
begins.
That. Yeah. No, you have to be around for a big space of time, just like with anybody, really. And then there's this kind of trust and this kind of I don't know, things just unfold rather than being pressured to happen.
And I think in those first few years when Liam was born, I let go a little bit, just a little bit about my career. I mean, I have a lot of projects I've been working on, but this is my first solo album in 9 years.
Yeah. And he's how old now?
9.
Yeah.
So
there you have it.
there you go. That's my answer to my question. But I think those first few years, I really did. I was still busy, especially with Swan Sovereign, but it was different. Both Tony and I decided he was touring still quite a bit. And that was what we were choosing. We were choosing for that to be the focus and for me to be home with Liam.
Mm-hmm.
I remember having him on my lap and sitting and writing things on at the piano. And he'd just be, you can hear I would be recording it because you just take a little voice memo of yourself creating.
Right.
And you hear these little blah, 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 blah. You hear these cute little sounds. And it's me trying to work on a song idea. And he's on my lap. I was like, you're here for this. So here we go.
Yeah. Yeah. So what's the hardest part of combining music and motherhood for you?
Just exactly what you said. I think I feel guilty when I'm really focused and maybe I'm not available to him. But I also think he's great. He's okay. And he has parents that, our jobs aren't 9 to 5. So we're home more in some ways.
If it's any consolation, our son Malcolm is now 26.
26, wow.
I know. And so I ask him every once in a while, did you feel like I was unavailable? Because I remember there was one point in time I was working a lot on a nonprofit called Artists for the Arts. He'd come in when he was little and say, Mom, I'm so sick of AFTA. Like, after. Like he was just telling me.
Funny.
But now that he's 26, I'll ask him what those years were like for him. And he says, I'm just so lucky to have parents like you. And I'm so glad for my upbringing and all the music that was in the house. And so all those kinds of things. So I think, yeah, but it is hard. So what's your favorite thing about being a mom?
Liam.
Aren't boys wonderful?
Oh, he's just so funny. He's so philosophical and funny. And I marvel at just the way he takes in the world. And it's exciting. It's exciting to watch somebody come into themselves constantly. It's so exciting. I don't know. It's the most exciting thing.
As you've heard in this episode, creating space for your creativity when you have children is challenging. There are no secrets. Finding islands of solitude is hard. As Rebecca said when I interviewed her recently about her Facebook post, you just have to get scrappy and use any bits of time you can find. The other takeaway for me is that the external threads, the practicalities and structure of life, are intimately connected and interwoven with the internal thread of how you treat yourself when you feel like you can't be a good enough artist or mother. Rebecca's question, how do you treat yourself when you can't get your work done, is the question that hit me hardest. Making music saved my life when I was young, and letting go of it for a time when my son was born was really hard. Plus, I got down on myself when I didn't live up to an impossible standard of perfection on all fronts. So how do we treat ourselves when we can't do the work we love, the work that keeps us sane? In my conversations with these singers, I heard the word guilt multiple times. Many of us feel that when it comes to our children, we should be available and all-loving all the time. But as Glennon Doyle writes in Untamed, calling martyrdom love teaches our children that when love begins, life ends. Jung said it best. There is no greater burden on a child than the unlived life of a parent. So true. Mothering is an intensely difficult and transformational endeavor. It literally and figuratively asks us to stretch and grow in ways we never knew we could. And even though the love we feel for our children is powerful and runs deep, it can feel sometimes like an impossible task to mother. It is, as Stephanie said, incredibly exciting to see our children becoming and blossoming right before our eyes. But growing up is hard work. It's full of uncertainty and emotional turmoil. As mothers, it can be exhausting to try and figure out and feel our way through a child's developmental stages. What worked last week has no effect today. What worked with one child might work with another, but sometimes not. Every child comes with their own gifts and challenges. I know for me, there were times when I just didn't want to be anyone's mother for a while. When Rebecca's daughter Nadia was going through a particularly rough growing patch, filled with emotional outbursts that would seemingly come from out of nowhere, Rebecca posted something on Facebook that resonated deeply with other mothers.
I made a post that sometimes mothers don't want to be mothers, and that's okay. And holy fuck, the private messages I got from that broke my heart. I was like, wow, that was a therapy session in and of itself. And so many moms were like, I am so glad you said this because I haven't said it. And sometimes I don't want to be this. I wish I wasn't. I just want to be alone. And all this to say that someday Nadia might read that, or she might hear a bit of a conversation I'm having with a mom about how we just want time to ourselves, but I want to be open with her all the time about how the same way it is when you feel angry or grumpy, it doesn't erode love or a bond or your willingness to stay. It's just that fluctuation, right? Like in meditation where the emotions pop up. And they're the waves on the surface of the vast, limitless ocean. As her parent, I will get angry. It doesn't mean I don't love her. I'll be crabby sometimes. It doesn't mean I don't love her. I might say the wrong thing. It doesn't mean I don't love her. I might need to be alone for a little bit. It doesn't mean I don't love her. Just engaging in the conversation around that as it comes up naturally, we talk about those things when it's the right time. But when it pops up, to say, you're my favorite person in the whole world. I love you more than anything. That never, ever, ever going to go away. Just this morning, like the first thing that she said when she woke up was like, I'm so happy you're my mama. And I'm like, I'm so happy you're my daughter. And Aww. It was the cuddliest, squishiest, most wonderful moment. And that's going to be there even if I'm being kind of a jerk because my coffers are empty.
Right. Right. And here's the lovely thing, too. I think children are sometimes afraid of these big feelings that they have because if you're angry, if you're fearful, if you're sad, it feels like there's only that feeling.
Right.
That all the other feelings that you've ever felt have gone away.
Yeah.
And they're never going to come back because you don't have a sense of things returning. You don't have a sense of the long game, the cycle of things, the seasons of an emotion. And for her to have you say these words about this feeling is here, but it doesn't mean that there isn't love underneath it.
Absolutely. I feel like modeling the truth of where we are in a compassionate way gives permission for future Nadia when has her own kids, if she chooses that path, that hopefully she has some permission to be out of sorts and that it's okay.
Giving ourselves permission to feel out of sorts, naming our feelings, and then, when it's appropriate, sharing them with our kids gives them permission to do the same. We are each other's greatest teachers. One of the things that I learned from my son was how performing wasn't the be-all, end-all of my life. The crucible of parenthood taught me that there was more to living a creative life than performing. Opera singer Renee Fleming offers the same perspective in her book, The Inner Singer. She received advice from the renowned diva Renata Scotto, who told her to have children. She told Renee that after having her son, she approached singing from a much healthier perspective. I don't live or die on the stage every night, she said. I have more than that in my life. Our children are, of course, the light of our lives, the more that puts our art and performing in perspective. In the final part of this two-part series, you'll hear what these women have discovered about who they are as mothers and creatives and how they navigate their inner lives so they don't go batshit crazy. You won't want to miss it. Hello, and welcome to Living a Vocal Life. Today's episode is the second in a two-part special series about creativity and motherhood. In episode 1, you heard the voices of 11 singers who generously agreed to answer 3 questions about how they navigate creativity and motherhood. The questions came from a Facebook post that a friend and former student, Rebecca Sanborn, posted a couple of years ago during the pandemic when her daughter Nadia was 2.5 years old. She wrote, "Artists with children, tell me your secrets. How do you get your work done? What are your patterns? How do you treat yourself when you can't get to your work?" In Rebecca's 3 questions, I saw 2 main threads. First, there's the external thread, the practical, the structure of a life. Who will take care of the children and when? How do you make time for islands of solitude to practice or create? Then there's the internal thread. What kind of relationship do you have with yourself, your children, and your art? And how do all these different parts of a self, often with different agendas and competing commitments, make space for each other in the constellation of your being? The responses to these questions were so rich and full of wisdom. When I began editing the interviews, I realized it would be impossible for one episode to hold it all. So I decided to make it a 2-part series. Part 1 was all about that first thread of questions about how singers structure their lives as creative parents. The women I interviewed talked about their children growing up in green rooms, breastfeeding backstage, postpartum depression, and the push-pull between their art and their mothering. They also shared the myriad ways they create islands of solitude for their creative work, moments stolen when their children are sleeping at school or daycare, with other family members, or even in the same room. In this episode, you'll hear how these same women navigate their inner lives when they can't get to their creative work, plus the many ways they've found to support their emotional, mental, physical, and spiritual well-being so they can be present for their children, their art, and themselves.
The miracle of life. Seasons change from day to day. All the world is a stage. It's a sign that you are changing. Right before my eyes.
Children grow up. They really do. One day you wake up and your child has changed right before your eyes. They grow from tiny, dependent babies that need our constant care into young adults who have their own lives and no longer need us, at least in the ways they did when they were young. But growing up takes time, and especially when a mother is in the early years of parenting, it can feel like an eternity before a child will become independent. So how do we treat ourselves when we can't get to our creative work? Here's Danielle Tucker, voice teacher, singer, and the driving force behind the Unstoppable Singer Summit, talking about her response to well-laid plans and schedules gone awry. So, how do you treat yourself when you can't get to your work? When something happens, you have to pick up the kids from school because one of them's sick or, those kinds of things. What is the internal dialogue like for you?
You can do all the planning and structuring you want, but stuff happens. Kids get sick at school, or the whole household gets sick, or a field trip that you had no idea about is happening 5 minutes after you drop a kid off. And, those things, they happen and really messes with the schedule. And my initial reaction is always like, I'm screwed. I panic, of course. I'm not going to lie. It sends me into a panic at first. But then again, I always like to go back to that setting that I developed during COVID, which is like, you know what? It can wait till tomorrow. Nobody's going to die, and thank God for cell phones and, being able to do things remotely. There is that internal dialogue that can be negative, but I try not to dwell in that space and live in that space. I give myself a moment and just recognize that I'm not curing cancer here. Everything's going to be okay.
Right. It's not brain surgery.
Yeah.
It sounds like what you've learned how to do through all of your life and through all of your work has been to put things in a kind of perspective. I know sometimes you have bad days, but you seem like you feel, for the most part, just centered and in the moment that you're in. Because there's so much fear in this business too. I'm not good enough. I'm never going to get whatever, fill in the blank. So much of the business is about rejection. So how you think about yourself, how you move through the world, how you react to the things that you can't control are all of the things that I feel like the inner singer in each of us needs to learn how to do.
Yeah. And I think you've really hit on how I feel I've grown as a person through all that. I mean, going through the pandemic was just like devastating, but also a big growth opportunity. I just went through a divorce this year. And so it's like, yeah, it's okay. You know, it's back-to-back things that make it feel like your whole universe has been burned to the ground. But, you know, what happens in a fire is those things that are the strongest kind of emerge from the rubble. And, you know, you pick those things back up and you just continue walking through life. Many, many things that have unfolded throughout my life have just really shown me who I am, and that it's really about the journey and how you're experiencing your journey. Are you happy? Are you having fun? Are you making memories? Are you growing? It's in the mundane things during the day, and it's during the big victories, the lowest lows. It's really the experience. It's not about where you're getting with it. We don't know this until we start getting a little bit older. You know, when these happen, you know, my business is very important to me, and I want to be successful in everything, but I just know that that's just a thing, and I'm not overly concerned about it.
And here's Moana, mother of 6, songwriter, and one of the lead singers for the 80s band, The Jets. How do you treat yourself when you can't get to your work?
That's a good question. A lot of meditation. Sometimes if I can't handle everything that's happening at home, I'll just check out and go for a drive. A good 10-minute drive by myself. I've got 9 sisters, so sometimes I just need to vent. Therapy session, get in the car and get it out of your system just to get it right. And I've learned that the older you get, I'm hitting 50 this year. The older you get, you can't afford not to take care of yourself. I've done the thing where you run yourself into the ground, and then you're no good to anybody. You're angry. Your kids think you're snapping. Your husband's like, you know, she's nagging me, and I'm not happy with myself. But I have noticed that if you don't take those little things that make you happy, now that we live in Hawaii, I'm trying to take my beach walk in the morning, or even if it's just a good runaway for 10 minutes and take a walk on the beach, sit and hear the waves. That makes all the difference.
Especially first thing in the day.
Yeah, I think that's key, is just get up and have some quiet time for yourself before the mayhem begins, before you start waking up kids. Everything starts, where's my shoes? I don't know where this is. I forgot my homework. And, you know.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think self-care is something that I think we all neglect, and it's just being parents. Sacrifice yourself for everybody else. By the time you realize you haven't eaten, it's 2 p.m. and you're feeling lightheaded and you're, I haven't had anything to eat. So I still have to find that space where I'm like, go for a walk, take a break, go for a drive to the beach and just think.
I know people say this all the time, but it's so true. Put that oxygen mask over your own face first. Then you can help others.
That is such a true thing. Gosh, you know, when you have young children, it's a tough thing to try to balance music, creativity, and a new child in your life. You got to put the priorities in the right place, because you've got one shot at giving your child the best environment at the youngest age, because whatever sticks with them when they're little, it affects them when they're older, right? My oldest boy, I feel bad. We did a lot of sacrifice with him where we just weren't thinking about his interests a lot. So I think you have to make a choice in the beginning when your children are really young. My sister Elizabeth, who had breast cancer, she decided early on that she was just going to take a break altogether. She put music on the shelf for a little while and just said, I've got to focus on my kids. I've got to give them everything I got, and I can't stress because the cancer will return. She felt like the cancer she had was kind of a manifestation of the stress, the toxicity of being in the industry and all the pressure. So she made a decision just to say, I'm going to check out while my babies are young, give them my time so that I'm not trying to juggle both. And then I can focus on it later. Whereas I didn't give up. I didn't quit right altogether. For the beginning of it, we tried to slow down because you just can't. You cannot breastfeed your baby and write songs and produce. You really do have to give 100% to something. And if growing a family is your priority, you have to give the best nutrients right in the beginning. And if that's what it is, you got to give up a little bit of that music in the beginning, just so that they're kind of anchored. Once you feel like your kids kind of have a little place and that they're not feeling like they're being kicked to the curb and they feel good, and some of them start preschool, then you know you can ease off. But yeah, those early years, especially as a family, are important. And I was going to tell you the reason why I wore this shirt that says family on it is because we forgot about that when we were in the music as the Jets. Our parents, without really realizing it, put the family on the side and everything was like the Jets. But now we realize you got to put the family first and put music where it needs to be so that at the end of the day, whether the music is there or not, you still have the people you love. And there's like a meaning behind every letter. Forget about me, I love you. And we had to learn that later on. Our family almost got torn apart because we weren't remembering those things. My parents didn't realize that they were just the showbiz parents. Get on the stage, sing, smile, and nothing else mattered. I don't feel good. I'm not feeling right. It was like, suck it up, get on the stage. I felt a little neglected with a family as big as mine, that my parents, we were like little kids on like a conveyor belt. When one was sick, okay, you're out, put the next one in. And it just felt like we were kind of just being used. Later on, we realized parents are just trying to survive as immigrants. And they came from culture that wasn't really very affectionate and nurturing. It was just like, suck it up. We're in America. We got to make this happen. But I'm learning with my life that if you don't give your children everything you've got, you lose what matters in the very end. And you may have all the accolades, but it'll feel empty if you don't put the things that matter most first, and that's people. Now I realize that if we just put the family first and we're happy, then everything will fall into place. You got your life and you'll get to it, but give that baby everything you got, because then she'll be set and you'll be set.
I know a part of me felt guilty that I couldn't always be present, either physically or mentally, when my son was growing up. Many of the women I talked with spoke of that same kind of guilt. Here's Rosi Amador, singer, percussionist, and voiceover actor, talking about the years when she ran her music booking agency when her children were in school.
It was tough, no doubt about it. It was tough. What I remember the most is that I worked like a maniac, and I was the mom who would leave her kids in this wonderful after-school program that they loved, but I was like the last mom to pick up her kids because I was working till the very last second. And I always felt guilty about that because every time they would run over to me and hug me, and I would be like a little bit of guilt, like, oh, I should have come like half an hour ago. Then I would have gotten half an hour more of their awake time, because then all that was left was, making dinner and reading to them until they fell asleep.
If you're a mom, I bet that's a pretty familiar story to you. And then there's the guilt we feel when we're not truly present for our children. When you're busy figuring out what's next, where the lunchbox disappeared to, why the baby's crying, or daydreaming about what life would be like if you could only make music full time, it's hard to see the miraculous being right in front of you. Here's a small piece of the conversation I had with singer, teacher, and songwriter Arlie James about how easy it is to get lost in overwhelm and how essential it is to come back into our bodies so we can be present for ourselves and our children. I remember when my son Malcolm was little, I went to a body, mind, soul retreat to do a lot of movement. And it was the first time that I'd really been away. And I came back and I could see him again.
Yes. Oh, gosh.
Oh,
Yep.
my God. And his little hands, his little pudgy, cute hands, and his skin and the smell of his hair. It was like all my senses were opened up again because I wasn't doing that swirling thing where I was planning for the future, trying to deal with the tyranny of the urgent in the present. And then
Yes, the tyranny of the urgent. That's right.
Yes. And nothing's really, that's why the word slow is helpful to me, because usually there's not really anything that's that urgent that I need to be taken completely out of this moment. So anyway, it was just a lovely way of actually appreciating this incredible being in front of me.
I relate to that so much on days when I just don't see Willa and Iris. I don't see them. Like I'm caring for them, but I haven't seen them. I haven't looked at them, right?
Yeah.
Another thing I learned about the nervous system, I mean, honestly, I just could geek out about the nervous system and how much we can really do to improve the quality of our lives with the knowledge of how to work with our body, right? For a very long time, I know you know a lot about sort of my own trauma history, but I was very, very disconnected from my body. And to learn how to listen to my body, to learn how to even pay attention and notice my body was really, really huge. I know we've talked about this, but I'm a survivor of sexual assault. And so a lot of survivors have a very difficult time connecting to our bodies because of what has happened, right? For me, reconnecting to my body is an ongoing process and it's just revolutionary. But one thing I learned was that the nervous system, you know, we have our brain and then the vagus nerve and the vagal pathways that go through our body and parasympathetic and sympathetic activation, all these sort of big words that just mean, you know, we're either dysregulated or regulated. We're either in balance or we're out of balance. We can either get stuck in fight or flight, or we can be sort of tanking into this autonomic sort of collapse, right? And what we want is this optimal balance of our nervous system, for very short way to explain this autonomic regulation. So what we've learned is that the nervous system, from our brain to our body, is, we think like, oh, we have a thought and then it changes our body. And we know that's true, right? You what you just said, you know, you had the thought slow and then your body's like, oh, that thought, right? And that's a really wonderful, quick way to sort of communicate with our body from our cerebral cortex, our brain, prefrontal cortex. But what we've learned is that autonomic pathways are 20%, 80%, and 20% of the information goes from the brain to the body, and 80% of the information goes from the body to the brain.
Whoa.
From the nervous system. But the idea that we move our body and we do something with our body, something as simple as stretching, letting our eyes wander, changing what we're doing with our body. And what happens then is our brain gets access to new stories, because our brain has to interpret a story, right, that our body is experiencing. And when we're in fight or flight and when we're in this sympathetic arousal, our brain is creating stories to match that story, right? Worry, panic.
Has to make sense.
Has to make sense, right? So when you can't get a hold of those thoughts and it feels overwhelming, if you can take a moment to change your body and to even take the 30 seconds of presence, or to let your eyes move around the room, it allows your brain to really have thoughts that you just don't have access to before. And this idea of taking care of yourself, this all, you know, self-care. Oh, what is self-care? Parental self-care. You know, you went away and you got regulated. It sounds like your body was more regulated, for lack of a better word. And then you were able to come home and see, you could see your son, right? I can always tell when I'm dysregulated because I'm moving fast, I'm talking fast, I'm working fast, and I miss the seeing. And so it's a great reminder. Talking about it is a great reminder.
There's so much about parenting that is slow, especially when they're small.
Yes.
They're holding onto your hand and you can't move beyond their capacity. Or you have to just pick them up and go. You know, I mean, that's an option too. But in terms of just being with them as they're discovering the world, you can't go too fast or they fall over or you're dragging them or... And
you miss it. You miss it.
Yes.
Miss it. You miss the hand.
Yeah, and you miss what they're seeing and hearing and feeling and all the stuff. But still, you have to get stuff done. And that is serving them too. So finding that balance, you can't be completely awestruck and in wonder at your child's beautiful hand through the whole day.
That's right.
You wouldn't get anything done. And the child would start looking at you like, what is going on with you, Mom?
Right.
We need to move on from here now.
I do need to have breakfast.
Right.
And get to school.
Right. And the French toast is burning over there.
It really is burning. That's
yes. Right. I loved this conversation with Ara for so many reasons. First, some great science is being done around the things we know intuitively about ourselves and how our bodies work. Studies validate our inner knowing and explain why, when we take a moment to stop, to look, listen, and notice our thoughts and body sensations, it helps our nervous system settle and regulate. And as Ara mentioned, doing this doesn't take much time. Changing the position of your body, moving your eyes around the room, or taking a few deep breaths can help regulate your autonomic nervous system in just a minute or two. And yes, sometimes, maybe often, we need more time than that to care for ourselves. But when all you have are small sips of time to come back into your body, these tools are really helpful. The more frequently we practice noticing, the easier it is to drop out of our busy brains and return to ourselves, our bodies, the music we make, and the children in our care. Whitney Jones, who you might remember from the first episode, has 4 children, ranging from 9 years to 6 weeks old. She has this to say about self-care.
As a mom, regardless of what field you're in, you have to self-care. Again, that's meditation or gratitude journal or doing my passion, which is music, going out in nature. Those things are important for me. I have to take eating, sometimes I need to eat today, Sometimes it's just taking that time for yourself to eat, to self-care, to love on yourself. I'm learning that I have to mother myself just as much as I have to mother my children. So I'll feed them and everything, and I'm washing and cleaning and doing what I got to do. And I look up and it's 2:00 in the afternoon and I haven't eaten. And I'm like, oh, no, Whitney, you have to take care of yourself. Mm-hmm. And when I've taken care of myself, everything else flows better. I can be more attentive as a mom, a wife, a musician. I'm not so stressed out, So I would say that's the number one thing to help connect everything is self-care, self-love, hands down. Meditation is very, very crucial to my mental health, my spiritual health, my emotional health. It is my me time. It is the time that I get to just go and focus on myself. And I don't like to say clear my mind, but, just focus on something. Think about what I'm thinking about, because that's essentially what I'm doing when I meditate. I'm watching all these thoughts. I like to think of them as clouds. Oh, that's a thought. That's a thought,
Just watching him go by, letting him go by.
Watch him go by. All right. That is what that is. It also helps me, again, just stay grounded. I feel like when I meditate, I am more in tune, which makes music easier for me to funnel, so to speak. I am a vessel. I hear music. I just hear it. And then okay, let me go sit at the piano and write, or the guitar, or let me make a voice memo on my phone. It makes the channels clearer, so to speak. And as a mom, it helps me to become more present.
How do you treat yourself when you can't get to your work? What happens in your mind? What kind of thoughts do you have when you're really frustrated by the fact that this creative thing is just right there and you can't get to it?
That's kind of how I feel about my album right now. But I know I'm just 6 weeks postpartum, so in time. But when I can't accomplish my goals or what I have set for, if there's something I need to work on in music, I get frustrated. I do. I can be a little short and snappy sometimes if I'm not able to do the thing that I love. Mm-hmm. I also can tell when I'm unable to do the thing that I love for so long. It takes a toll on my mental health. I'll start feeling anxious or depressed, and then I can get to a point where I just don't want to do it at all. And I always can tell when I dip into depression because I won't touch the piano. I won't sing. I don't want to hear music. I just kind of block it out. So when things are flowing, and it's not always easy, but when things are flowing, I have to stay in that vibration and make sure I can stay afloat.
So it's medicine for you.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. If you notice yourself going into a darker place, how do you pull music back in? What's the trigger that gets you back into that flow?
First of all, admitting that I'm in the dark place.
Yes.
Analyzing. it's almost like let's just say I'm in the dark place and this is the dark place. And then I like bring it out and I'm like, oh, this is a dark place. Let's look at it. What happened? Why? What is it? Okay, I get it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like I have to really like look at it and understand what's going on. I'm also in therapy. I love therapy. Every therapist needs a therapist. Every person should experience therapy at some point in their life.
Agreed. It's so helpful to have these wise people to help us figure ourselves out and just, more tools for living. Yeah.
So I would say, again, that self-care is crucial because it helps bring me out of that, and it helps me to be able to tap back into music.
Mm-hmm.
When I meditate, when I write in my gratitude journal, when I've gone to therapy or I've sat in the sun, sometimes it's just getting some vitamin D, sitting in the sun,
Mm-hmm.
especially after just having a baby. I'm in the house a lot, and I can tell when it's day 2 or 3 and I've been in the house and I'm like, all right, I got to get out of this house. Even if it's just the backyard, I need sun.
Yeah.
Sunlight is crucial.
Nature, crucial.
Nature. Oh, yeah.
Nature, a gratitude journal, therapy, and meditation. You hear about them all the time. I first heard about these tools when I was a hippie in my teenage years. In the 70s, I lived in a commune where we grew some of our own food, and I read all the books in the hippie canon, many of which talked about the benefits of meditation. But it wasn't until my early 50s that I finally found the time to meditate when I was diagnosed with breast cancer. Surgery and months of chemo and radiation sat me down hard. Thankfully, I had the support and resources to take time out to heal and do some self-care that I'd been putting off for years. I had a severe inner taskmaster that always pushed me hard to create, keep my private voice studio running at full capacity, and care for my family. I wanted to continue to do those things, but in a different way internally. Life is stressful enough, but when you're constantly pushing, always striving for perfection, the stress hormone cortisol runs rampant. It had totally overwhelmed my body. Like Moana's sister Elizabeth, I knew I needed to learn how to manage my stress in a healthier way. So I took a much-needed break. I called it my cancer sabbatical, and I'm still grateful for the time it gave me to slow down and experiment with some practices that would help me keep my stress levels from overwhelming my body in the future. Now, I don't meditate for hours every day. In fact, my practice is pretty short, just 10 minutes. But I try to do it every day, first thing in the morning. I never thought I could sit for that long, and it turns out I can't. I meditate lying down in bed using a meditation app. It turns out the music practicing muscle that I've developed over the years helps with this form of practicing too. And if I do it in the morning, I can reconnect to the feeling of being mindful more easily throughout my day. I'm happy to say it's been over a decade since I started the practice, and the cancer hasn't returned. But if it ever does, I'll be more prepared than I was before. Recently, I had a conversation with my friend Rebecca, who posted the questions on Facebook that this series is based on. I wanted to find out what had transpired in her life in the last 2 years and ask her the questions she had posted for others. Here she is, talking about how she treats herself when she can't get to her work.
I think I still, on a daily basis, compulsively create a secret to-do list that's more like a wish list that I treat like a to-do list, which is too bad because I then get down on myself if I don't get to those things. And I'm always surprised and shocked when I can't get to them because I am busy parenting. And I'm working with my therapist continually on this aspect of especially trying to regard my parenting as creativity rather than trying to, I want to try to get to these things today. And if I don't, instead of feeling like I failed, of considering that the big picture of being creative with my daughter and creating play and creating our routine and all that did get accomplished. And so it was a win.
Mm-hmm.
Because that was enough. And every day I wake up thinking I'm going to get to tackle something that realistically, I'm just not going to get to.
So how old were you when you had Nadia?
I was 41.
So you'd had a long time to be an artist before she was born.
A long time. And my husband and I, Jai and I, had already been together for 18 years. And we had obviously a very strong rhythm already in place of this is how we do things. This is how we use our time. And when we knew we were going to have a baby, we walked into it headlong with a strong period of grief, actually. We wanted to have a child, but also we were like, okay, this is when we say goodbye to how things have been. Mm-hmm. And we took the opportunity to really be honest and open about losing that and the loss of it. And I think that fed into a healthier perspective when she actually did arrive. Because we'd spent some time already saying goodbye to our former way. Although still, I think even this weekend, we're still a little bit in shock. It's weird. We're like, whoa, who is this? She's in her house and she's not leaving. What? Did we have a kid? When did that happen? It's weird.
I totally get that. John and I were together for 20 years before we had Malcolm, and we'd been through a lot together, we thought.
Yeah.
We'd been through almost breaking up at least twice, maybe 3 times. We'd been through record deals and losing record deals and ups and downs of career. And so we thought, oh, we can have a kid together and it'll be fine. It's the hardest thing ever. It is the hardest thing.
Yeah. It's the hardest thing.
It is the hardest thing. And it's hard on a relationship where you get to have time as a creative person, you get to have time by yourself. You have time with the other person in relationship. You have time with the other person, in your case and mine, with the other person in relationship in creativity. And so all of that is thrown up in the air and just feels like it stays up there. And every once in a while you meet this person in your house that you invited there. She can't help it that she's there. You said, yes, come on in.
Oh.
And wow. And they're changing all the time. It's like living with an alcoholic. I don't know who I'm going to get. Am I going to get the cute little bubbly, I love you, mommy person? Or am I going to get the one that's having to try out all of her emotions on me because I'm the safest person in the room to try hard emotions out on? And wow, I thought I was a patient, kind, loving person. And I was just shown the dark side.
Oh, yeah.
Of myself. I'm so glad that you are doing therapy around creativity and parenting because, wow, it's some powerful stuff.
Yeah. And it's the thing that really drove me to therapy in the first place. I've done it in the past at certain points and always been a strong supporter of therapy. But when I became a mother and realized how much I needed help with it, especially with the darker side of things, because you end up parenting yourself all over again when you encounter old, the patterns that you grew up with. And maybe some you don't want to change and some you do. And that takes work, really deep work. And I needed a wise woman, an elder, to lead me through that, who'd already done it before. That's why I sought that. It's exactly what you're talking about, of encountering these triggers, huge triggers for the emotional stuff and wanting to handle it with hopefully a modicum of grace.
Right? Because there's this little person that's depending on you. You're their world.
Yeah.
You are their universe. And so how you are in your being feels more important. At least that's what it sounds like you're saying. And I know that's what I felt. It's just hugely important. And I felt like I was failing on every level. Yeah. And so how could if I was going to be a good mom, how could I even have these thoughts and feelings?
It's huge. And we try to really verbalize a lot of that in our home. And Nadia one of my favorite things that she does once in a while is, if she's really, testing, she's pushing. She's 5 now, by the way. But maybe a year and a half ago, she started every once in a while being like, Mama, I think that you forgot to take your 10 breaths. I'm like, man, you know what? I did. I am really, really crabby right now. Do you want to do them with me? Usually she just likes to watch me, but yeah, I get reminded to take my 10 deep breaths.
Wow. They are such big teachers, aren't they?
You know? Yeah.
Besides therapy, Rebecca relies on her meditation practice to keep her sane, something she started during the first year of the pandemic. In the next segment, she talks about how it's changed her brain and is helping her unlearn some old ways of thinking about her self-worth.
This goes back to the pandemic year and me trying to find tools to, like everyone else, we're all finding a way to survive and stay sane. And so I started a meditation practice, just 15 minutes. I knew if it was more, I wasn't going to do it. And I'm on it almost 3 years now, every day, 15 minutes. It's one thing that I do carve out and I'm pretty rigid about. The timing is wild. It's all over the place. It's whenever I can do it during the day. But it happens and it's unguided and I just sit and it's quiet and I just breathe and watch my thoughts go bonkers. And then, you know, as one does. And even if the meditation is about not wanting to meditate, that's where it is. But I feel the way it has changed my brain and helped me just sort of give into these moments of just staying extremely present with who I actually am instead of that constant compulsion to equate who I am with what I have accomplished. And that is always my cross to bear, is being like, well, my worth equals what I have accomplished. My value in this world is proportionate to what I can get done. And that's a daily thing that I have to unlearn. And so I work on that a lot. And with parenting specifically, when I'm away from Nadia, I get really wound up with, oh, I need to get this done. Like, oh no, I ran out of time and now I have to be a parent. And then it flips so wildly when I pick her up from school or she wakes up in the morning. It's like I could just die. She's so beautiful. I can't even take it. I just smell the top of her head or just squeeze her or just like, and it's so all consuming and it's so complete. And that helps fade those wild meters that want to say, you didn't do this today, you failed, or you're, all of that. So I think the meditation practice of learning to sit with disappointment or sit with unfulfilled expectation or sit with, I don't know, unbridled joy or despair, whatever is happening. And that tool, and also just trying to be extremely present with my child and understanding that this is it right now, holding her hand, walking home from school. This is it. It doesn't really get any better than this. So here it is.
Woman's made to stand and sway. Rock the baby, the baby. A woman's made to stand and sway. Rock the baby, the baby. A woman's made to stand and sway. A woman's made to stand and sway. Bring the water, the water. A woman's made to stand and sway. A woman's made to stand and sway. Bring the water, the water.
One of the recurring themes in my conversations with these incredible women was the concept of seasons. Here's Karla Harris's exquisite description of the value of every season in a singer's life and how even the periods when we can't get to our creative work can help us grow.
I go back to the different seasons and to know that even if you don't feel like you are being super productive, just because it's not the season where you're seeing the stalk come up out of the ground and it's waving in the air and you've got this bountiful field of all this stuff you've created and everything, does not mean that creativity is not happening. It doesn't mean that you are not somehow honoring your artistic self. you can honor your artistic self and be in that place. And it could be looking like a very fallow field. But when fields are fallow, there's all the stuff going on underneath the surface. There are worms that are digging through that soil to make sure that the roots can get in there deeply. There are nutrients that are being created to make that very rich soil. There's rest that is happening. It's resting so that when it's time for a lot of growth, it can support it. So if you can look at those times in your life when your attention is centered on this human being you have brought into the world and you cherish and adore and are trying to do your best to raise them up in a great fashion, that's your priority. But it doesn't mean that you can't be having things going on underneath the surface artistically. Just find a way, read a book, jot down ideas, sing just for the joy of it, just for the way it feeds your soul. All of these things are what's going on underneath the surface that will support you when you get your time back and can focus on the more productive side of your art. And don't beat yourself up about it, because remember, that fallow field is just as important.
So why are we so hard on ourselves when we can't get to our creative work? Why do we beat ourselves up sometimes? Here's Ara again, talking about one of the underlying emotions that emerged for her when I asked her this question. If you could go back in time and just say one thing to that person that you were that wanted to create so badly, what would you ask her?
What I would ask her is, what are you afraid of? What are you so afraid of? Because so much comes from fear, right? Anxiety. I'm so afraid of something. And what I would have said probably is, I'm afraid I'm not going to be able to be an artist. I'm afraid I'm never going to create again. I'm afraid these kids are going to take it all and I'm just going to live in bathrobes and Costco. And for God's sake, there's a small little death every time I walk in Costco, they're just like the fear that it's all going to be gone. And what I would say now is trust the seasons of your life. Trust the tide will come in and go out so many different times, that this season goes by like a breath in and out, right? That young baby it's a season, and the work is different in that season. That is not the time to write your album 3 months after your baby's born. Maybe it is for someone. It wasn't my season, right? In my journey of my life, and again, case study of one, everyone's different. There's no hyperbolic blanket statement about anybody's life with creativity and parenting, because we all have to figure out our own way. But I think what I would say is, it's okay. You can be here all the way. And that is part of the journey of all the things you will write and do and be creatively. You can be here, right? You can be fully here and trust that it will come in time. I want to speak to just the sexism and the reality of the feeling for women getting older, and that idea that we have to get it done by a certain point or it's done. It's just not the same for men. So this idea that, like, if I don't write this masterpiece now, the clock is ticking. And if I do this, then it is over forever. Right. And for all of us, I think reframing what success looks like, what creativity looks like, why we do it, what it's for. Anyway, I think what I would say is trust the seasons and know that if the tide feels like it's out right now, like creativity is so far away, that it will come back. It always does. It always does. You can't separate it from your body. It's not dead. You're not gone. It's always there. It's always there. But it really does come like tides. And so the water, it's sort of like the water was stopped and it had to flow somewhere else. And I think about this idea of the ways I think that I'm going to be creative, right? Like, I am a fill in the blank. I am a singer. I am a songwriter. This is how my creativity, this is what it looks like when I'm creative. And I think I would tell I think that's a little bit of bullshit. I think that we are wildly creative, right? And that we have different seasons also of the work that we create. Also, I think this pressure of putting it out, like, if you don't put it out, what's the point, right? This putting it out into the world.
Right.
And I think sometimes the things that grow, they grow for us. They grow because we need them. We need to eat it. No one sees that. No one will ever see it. And it grew for us, right? Creativity doesn't always belong to someone else. And I mean, I don't know if it ever belongs to someone else. I think it's for us, right? And then we have no idea where it's going to go and who it's going to feed or not, right? If we decide to be brave and put it out there.
Whether we do this creative work for ourselves or share it with the world, we do it because it feeds our souls. And this soul food doesn't just nourish us, it nourishes our children too, because our health supports theirs. And here's another thought. As Ara said, we are all wildly creative. And I believe that how we think about that creativity matters. What if instead of narrowly defining who we are by what we do, we could use our creativity to see the different roles we play in new ways? Here's singer-songwriter Alex Weiler with some words of wisdom about purpose, binary thinking, and how she tries to embrace all the different parts of herself.
Our society has a particularly good way of putting us in boxes, especially women and especially mothers, to say that you can only be one or the other. And when I miss a self-imposed deadline or I'm unable to get to my work like I would like to, I usually go to those binary ways of thinking. And so I try to notice that, and I try to sit with it for a minute and just say, oh, I am thinking that it can only be one or the other, that, you know, my life is zero sum right now. I can only be a good mother or a good creative. I can only be a good Instagram mom or a good Instagram artist. Like, there's all these ways that these tensions are just fighting each other. So I really try to notice that, number one. And even the way that we talk about our purpose, it's always singular. And I try to embrace the reality that we as humans are multifaceted, very complex beings with multiple purposes and multiple ways of finding meaning throughout our experiences in our life, taking care of children and taking care of my art. A lot of times they feel equally important, and I still have to pick one or the other. When I'm feeling that tension, I really try to say out loud, where's the gray? Instead of things being black and white, where's the gray today? Where can I be both? On any given day, I am a creator and a caregiver. How can I embrace all of these different parts of me that are always existing at the same time? I'm never just living one purpose. I'm always living multiple purposes. I'm always an artist and a mother and a wife and a gardener and all these other different things, these identities that I hold really dear to my heart. And two of them happen to both be really, really big. Taking care of my kids is one of the biggest blessings that I have in my life, and being an artist and being able to express myself is another huge one. So they're both really important to me, and I refuse to just choose one.
Perhaps we don't have to choose between different aspects of ourselves. Maybe we can embrace and pursue all that we are called to, but it doesn't have to happen all at once. What would it look or feel like if the different parts of ourselves were woven together into a life where one part, one thread, was dominant, depending on the moment we're in? For me, and the women whose voices you've heard here, having even a small, thin thread of creativity that's just for us is essential no matter what season of life we're in. It helps us stay connected to our own evolution as artists and human beings. As author Alan Watts writes, the desire to create is connected to the desire to evolve. We are here to express ourselves. Creativity is not an occupation. It is our birthright. It is a way for us to make meaning of our lives, to reframe our relationship to the world, and to communicate the deepest aspects of ourselves.
A woman will stand and sway, a gentle rocking with no boat and no water. Some ancient lullaby threaded through the metronome of hips. Pendulum of flesh to quiet the cries of babies never born, already born, not born quite yet. Her breast an offering even to a lover to fill the mouth, quench the thirst, pacify the restless animal living in his every cell. She will recognize pain without words, wrap herself around it, wrestle it to the ground, tender warrior. She needs no bullets, knives, drones, she absorbs them, unthreads the needle of violence done in the name of anyone, anything, and sews instead a warming quilt. She harvests the garden, hears faraway music often, and without warning, sees the child in us each by each, humming a quiet tune underneath her breath for the broken ones.
I began thinking about creating this series over 2 years ago when I read Rebecca's post on Facebook. Hearing the stories of these women and their thoughts on creativity and mothering was healing for me in a way that I hadn't expected. It felt like a younger version of myself in a different season of parenting had an opportunity to commiserate with other mothers. Turns out I'm not alone. Even though Rebecca's not in the same season of parenting that I am, she said this when I asked her if any of the responses to her post were helpful and if she carried them with her still.
I think that the biggest help was commiseration. 0.01% of me was looking for a magic key. And some people did try to provide one, or like, if you just wake up at 5 a.m. before and I'm like, what the are you talking about? I don't know if it's okay to drop an F-bomb on this. You can edit that out. But truly, I have chronic insomnia, and I have for, 30 years. There's several nights a week where I only get 2 or 3 hours of sleep, and it's not appropriate for me to be waking up at 5 a.m. if I've been awake until 5 a.m. And so people's personal answers that worked for them, I wasn't like dismissing them out of hand, but some of them I knew like, this probably won't work for me. And the biggest like anguish and hilarity came from the people who were like, you won't. And I loved that honesty, and I loved the community, the posse surrounding me being like, yeah, same happened. It's desperate and it's difficult. You're doing everything you can. You're enough. It helped knowing that I wasn't alone, or that I wasn't missing something or doing something wrong, or like not figuring out the secret. Yeah.
So there are no secrets. But hopefully, what you've heard in this series has given you some insight, hope, and a sense that you're not alone in the joys and frustrations of living your life as a creative mother. One of the most significant chapters in a child's life is when they grow old enough to leave you. But no matter where they live or how old they are, you will always be their mother. The love we plant in our children is a seed that will grow and be with them always, no matter where they go or what they do. Hopefully, they'll return with their own gifts of love now and again, sharing new ways to see the world through their creativity and awareness.
My love will stay with you. Must come undone to grow, to be what you can become, and trust what you know. Now you're about to find your place in this world and your time. Wherever you go, whatever you find, whatever you do, my love will stay.
The relationship with our own creativity continues to grow over time into something new. There may be weeks, months, or even years when it feels like you don't have the time, energy, or capacity to sing, write, or create. But that time is not being wasted. Many women, once they're released from the day-to-day care of their children, have an incredible surge of creativity, made even more potent because of all they've learned from their experiences as a parent. These lessons of love add to the richness of a creative life. They give us more to work with as we express ourselves through our unique lived experience and voice. I'd like to express my gratitude to the 11 women who generously lent their voices to this series. Rebecca Sanborn, Danielle Tucker, Moana Wolfgramm, Nikenji, Rosi Amador, Aurelie James, Whitney Jones, Karla Harris, Alex Weiler, China Forbes, and Stephanie Schneiderman. It was a gift to spend time with them. The songs featured in this series are Stand and Sway, written by Aurelie James and Beth Wood from their album Deep Blue, Sleep is a Wonderful Thing by Morley from the album Borderless Lullabies, Right Before My Eyes, written by my husband John Smith from our New Shoes Orchestra album Pandora's Box, and Stephanie Schneiderman's song Wherever You Go from her album Crossfire. For more information about these singers and links to the music featured in this series, please check out the show notes or go directly to livingavocal.life.com. Please let me know how this series resonated with you and contribute to the conversation by leaving a comment on the episode page. I look forward to hearing your thoughts. While you're there, you can also sign up for Vocal Notes so you won't miss an episode of the podcast. About once a month, you'll get an email in your inbox filled with singing inspiration, vocal tips, and more, just for singers. Thanks again for listening, and until next time, keep on singing.